Man alone entered the sacred cave the native girl told him to avoid. Inside, he discovered who she really was. The rope snapped. Marcus Blackwood plummeted 15 feet into darkness, his body slamming against jagged limestone walls before crashing onto the cave floor. Pain shot through his left shoulder as he rolled, gasping for air that tasted of ancient dust and something else. Something metallic. Above him, sunlight filtered through the opening he had rappelled through, creating a narrow shaft of golden light that barely illuminated his surroundings. The cave stretched endlessly into blackness beyond his vision. He should never have come here. 3 days earlier, Marcus had ridden into the settlement of Copper Ridge with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and a geological survey contract that promised to change his fortune. At 38, he had spent the better part of 2 decades mapping territories across the American frontier, but this job was different. The railroad company suspected significant mineral deposits in these Arizona badlands, and they were paying handsomely for confirmation. The town consisted of little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of weathered buildings scattered along a dusty main street. Sagebrush and mesquite dotted the surrounding landscape, while red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels against the perpetually blue sky. Heat shimmers danced across the desert floor even in early morning, promising another scorching day. Marcus had been examining rock samples near the eastern ridge when she appeared. The young woman emerged from between 2 massive boulders as if materialized from the stone itself. Her skin held the warm bronze of mixed heritage, her long black hair braided with small turquoise beads that caught the morning light. She wore a simple cotton dress, faded but clean, and moved with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape. She looked perhaps 20 years old, though her dark eyes held depths that suggested older wisdom. "You should not be here," she said, her English clear but accented with the musical cadence of her native tongue. Marcus removed his hat, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I have permits from the territorial government, miss. I am conducting a geological survey." "The papers of distant men mean nothing to these rocks," she replied, stepping closer. "I am Ayanna. My grandfather was chief of the Tohono people who lived here before the soldiers came, before the miners, before men like you." There was no anger in her voice, only a quiet certainty that made Marcus pause his work. He had encountered many native peoples during his travels, had seen the displacement and tragedy that followed American expansion. Most regarded him with suspicion or outright hostility. This young woman seemed different, watchful, protective, but not hostile. "I mean no disrespect to your people's land," Marcus said carefully. "I am simply documenting mineral content for potential development." Ayanna tilted her head slightly, studying him with those penetrating dark eyes. "Development. You mean destruction. I mean progress. Jobs for people in towns like Copper Ridge. Prosperity. And what of the sacred places? What of the spirits that dwell in stone and wind?" Marcus had heard such beliefs expressed many times before. While he respected them in principle, his scientific training made him skeptical of spiritual claims about landscape. "I understand these places hold meaning for your people, but there are ways to develop responsibly, to honor." "There is a cave," Ayanna interrupted, pointing toward a cluster of towering rock formations to the north. "In those red cliffs. My people have protected it for generations uncounted. Whatever you find elsewhere, whatever minerals you seek, promise me you will not enter that place." Something in her tone made Marcus look more carefully at the distant cliffs. Even from this distance, he could see the dark opening she referenced, a shadow against the crimson stone perhaps 200 feet above the desert floor. "What makes it sacred?" he asked. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the cave entrance. "Some places hold memories. Some places hold power. Some places hold truths too dangerous for those unprepared to understand them." "And you believe I am unprepared?" She turned those dark eyes back to him, and Marcus felt an unexpected chill despite the desert heat. I believe you are like most men who come to take from this land. You see only what can be measured, weighed, sold. You do not see what watches back. That evening in the saloon, Marcus asked the bartender about Ayanna and the cave. That girl, the man said, polishing a glass with a stained cloth, comes into town maybe once a month for supplies, pays in silver, always exact change. Keeps to herself mostly, but folks say she knows things. Weather patterns, where to find water, which trails are safe. What about the cave she mentioned? The bartender glanced around the nearly empty saloon before leaning closer. Miners tried working those cliffs about 5 years back. 3 different expeditions. All of them turned back after just a few days, claiming the rock was unstable, not worth the effort. But the strange thing was, they all left their equipment behind. Good picks, ropes, lanterns, just abandoned everything and rode out of town like devils were chasing them. Equipment failures happen, Marcus said. Desert conditions are hard on tools. Maybe. But Tom Hendricks, he was the foreman on the second expedition. Tough as rawhide, that man. Worked mines from California to Colorado without backing down from anything. When he came back to town, he looked like he had seen something that broke his spirit. Spent 3 days drinking himself senseless, then caught the first stage east. Never saw him again. Marcus sipped his whiskey, considering. What did he say happened up there? But is the strange part. He would not talk about it at all. Just kept muttering something about voices in the stone and eyes in the darkness. Course, desert sun can play tricks on a man's mind. The next morning, Marcus rode toward the northern cliffs with his surveying equipment. He told himself he was simply conducting a thorough geological assessment, that scientific curiosity drove him toward the Forbidden's cave. But deep down, he knew Ayanna's warning had sparked something more than professional interest. The climb proved challenging. The cliff face was steep and loose in places, requiring careful navigation between stable handholds. Marcus had learned rock climbing during his early surveying days, and his experience served him well as he worked his way upward with ropes and pitons. The cave entrance was larger than it had appeared from the valley floor, perhaps 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall, carved by centuries of wind and water into a natural archway. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying scents of moisture and mineral deposits that suggested the cave system extended deep into the cliff. Marcus anchored his climbing rope and prepared to descend into the darkness. That was when he heard footsteps on the ledge behind him. I asked you not to come here. He turned to find Ayanna standing at the cave entrance, having apparently climbed the cliff face by some route he had not seen. She wore the same simple dress. But now he noticed a leather pouch at her waist and what appeared to be ritual markings painted on her arms in white clay. How did you get up here so quickly? He asked. I have been climbing for 2 hours. I know these cliffs better than you know the streets of whatever distant city you call home, she replied. Please, Mr. Blackwood, return to your valley. There are minerals enough elsewhere to satisfy your railroad masters. You know my name. I know many things, including what waits in the darkness below. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. He found only genuine concern and something that might have been sadness. If this place is truly dangerous, why not simply block the entrance? Roll stones across it, make it impassable? Ayanna shook her head. Some doors cannot be sealed from the outside. Some truths cannot be buried. They can only be guarded. Guarded by whom? She met his eyes directly. By those who understand the cost of knowledge. Marcus felt drawn to this young woman in ways that surprised him. Her beauty was obvious, but there was something more in intelligence and depth that challenged his assumptions about frontier life. Most people he encountered seemed focused purely on survival, on the immediate necessities of food, shelter, and safety. Ayanna spoke of larger concepts, of responsibilities that transcended individual need. What if I promised to be careful? He asked. What if I agreed to respect whatever I find, to disturb nothing? Promises are like morning mist in the desert, she replied. They vanish the moment they encounter heat. Then come with me. Guide me. Show me what you believe I should see, and help me understand why it matters. Ayanna was quiet for several minutes, her gaze moving between Marcus and the cave entrance. Finally, she sighed deeply. My grandfather used to say that some people carry enough light to survive darkness, while others bring only shadows. I cannot tell which you are, Marcus Blackwood, but I fear I am about to find out. Now, lying on the cave floor with his rope severed and his shoulder throbbing, Marcus realized how prophetic her words had been. He managed to sit up, testing his limbs for serious injury. His left shoulder was likely dislocated, but everything else seemed functional. More importantly, he still had his lantern and a small supply of oil. The lantern's glow revealed carved walls covered in symbols unlike anything he had seen before. The markings were not random scratches, but deliberate, purposeful artwork that seemed to tell a story. Human figures interacted with shapes that might represent animals, celestial bodies, or abstract concepts. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, suggesting a sophisticated culture with advanced artistic techniques. Marcus stood carefully, using the cave wall for support. The carved symbols continued deeper into the chamber, forming a narrative pathway that beckoned him forward. Despite Ayanna's warnings, despite the accident that had brought him here, his scientific curiosity overrode caution. The cave extended much further than expected. What had appeared to be a simple hollow in the cliff face revealed itself as an extensive tunnel system carved through solid rock. The air grew cooler as he progressed, and he began to hear something unexpected, the sound of running water. 20 minutes of careful walking brought him to an underground chamber that defied explanation. The space was vast, perhaps 100 feet across and twice as long, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared beyond his lantern's reach. But more remarkable than the size was the evidence of habitation. Stone benches lined the walls, carved from living rock with precision that would challenge modern tools. Elaborate murals covered every surface, depicting scenes of daily life, religious ceremonies, and astronomical observations that demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. In the center of the chamber, a natural spring bubbled up through the floor, forming a clear pool perhaps 20 feet in diameter. The water was so pure that Marcus could see carved symbols on the bottom, as if the pool itself was part of some larger artistic statement. But what captured his attention most powerfully were the remains. Human skeletons lay arranged in careful patterns around the chamber, each positioned according to some ceremonial protocol. These were not the random bones of accident victims or warfare casualties. The skeletons showed signs of respectful burial, with personal artifacts placed beside. Each individual and preservation techniques that had maintained bone integrity for what must have been centuries. Marcus counted at least 30 complete skeletons, ranging in size from children to adults. All showed evidence of intentional interment rather than natural death in the cave. This had been a sacred burial ground, a place where an entire community had chosen to spend eternity. The realization struck him like physical blow. He was standing in a tomb, a holy place that represented generations of cultural memory and spiritual significance. His presence here was not just trespassing, it was desecration. He began to back toward the tunnel entrance, but stopped when his lantern light revealed something that made his blood freeze. One of the skeletons was wearing a familiar turquoise necklace. Marcus approached cautiously, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The skeleton belonged to a young woman positioned near the sacred spring in a place of obvious honor. Around her neck was a necklace identical to one he had seen Ayanna wearing just days before, but that was impossible. These remains were clearly ancient, preserved by the cave's unique conditions for generations beyond counting. The necklace could not be the same one worn by a living woman, unless— "You understand now," said a voice behind him. Marcus spun around to find Ayanna standing at the chamber entrance, her figure backlit by lantern glow. But something was wrong with the scene. Her image seemed to flicker slightly, like heat shimmer or candlelight reflected in disturbed water. "How did you get down here?" he asked. "The rope is broken." "I have been here much longer than you realize," she replied, walking toward him with that same fluid grace he had admired before. "This has been my home for 97 years. "That is impossible. You are 20 years old." Ayanna smiled sadly. "I was 20 when the soldiers came to drive my people from this land. I was 20 when the miners began blasting sacred sites for gold and copper. I was 20 when I chose to remain here rather than abandon the responsibility passed down by my grandfather." Marcus looked again at the skeleton wearing the turquoise necklace, then back at the young woman approaching him. The impossible truth began to settle in his mind like sediment in still water. "You died here," he said quietly. "Death is a word used by people who see only one layer of existence," Ayanna replied. "My body rests with my ancestors, yes, but my spirit remains to guard what must be protected. You are a ghost. I am a guardian. I am memory given form. I am the promise my grandfather made to protect this sacred place from those who would exploit or destroy it." Marcus felt the cave walls closing in around him, though he knew the sensation was psychological rather than physical. Everything he had believed about the nature of reality was crumbling beneath the weight of direct experience with something beyond scientific explanation. "Why did you try to stop me from coming here?" "Because I hoped you might be different," Ayanna said, now standing close enough that he could see the sorrow in her dark eyes. "Because I hoped you might be someone who could learn respect without requiring proof. Because I am tired, Marcus Blackwood. So very tired of carrying this burden alone." "What burden?" She gestured toward the chamber around them. "My people chose this place as their final resting ground because it sits above one of the richest mineral deposits in the territory. Gold, silver, copper, enough wealth to fund a dozen railroads or build 100 towns. They knew men like you would eventually come seeking it." Marcus understood immediately. The cave was not just a burial ground, it was a barrier between the miners and the treasure they sought. As long as the cave remained undisturbed, the minerals below would stay hidden. "So you guard the gold." "I guard something far more valuable," Ayanna corrected. "I guard the memory of people who understood that some things matter more than wealth. I guard the knowledge that land has meaning beyond its material value. I guard the truth that progress without wisdom leads only to destruction." "And what happens if I tell others about this place? About the minerals?" Ayanna's expression grew infinitely sad. "Then I will do what I have done before. I will make them forget, or I will ensure they never leave to tell others. It is not work I enjoy, but it is work I cannot abandon." Marcus thought about the miners who had fled the cliffs, leaving their equipment behind. He thought about the foreman who had returned to town broken and haunted, unwilling to speak about what he had experienced. "You drove them away." "I showed them truth they were unprepared to accept. Most chose to run rather than confront the reality of what they had discovered. But some—" She paused, gesturing toward a section of the chamber where Marcus now noticed several sets of bones that looked less ancient than the others. "Some chose to stay. You killed them. I offered them the same choice I offer you now. They could leave this place and never return, carrying with them the knowledge that some boundaries should not be crossed. Or they could remain here, becoming part of what they had tried to violate." Marcus realized he was trapped in more ways than one. Even if he could find another way out of the cave, he now carried knowledge that would inevitably lead others here. The existence of vast mineral wealth would draw mining companies, railroad interests, and territorial government attention. The sacred burial ground would be destroyed in the rush for profit. "What choice are you offering me?" he asked. Ayanna moved closer, and Marcus caught the scent of sage and desert flowers, impossible aromas for someone who existed only as spirit. "You could leave," she said softly. Return to your survey work, report that these cliffs contain nothing of commercial value, and accept a contract elsewhere. Live your remaining years knowing you chose wisdom over wealth. And the other option? She touched his face with fingers that felt surprisingly warm and solid. You could stay. Accept the responsibility I have carried alone for nearly a century. Help me guard this place and its secrets. Find peace and purpose greater than personal gain. Marcus looked around the chamber at the carefully arranged skeletons, at the elaborate artwork that represented generations of cultural achievement, at the clear spring that had sustained this sacred place through decades of change and violence. He thought about his life up to this point, 38 years of mapping territory for people who saw only dollar signs and development opportunities. Surveying land for railroads and mining companies who transformed living landscape into industrial profit. Following orders from distant offices occupied by men who had never felt desert sand between their fingers or watched sunrise paint red rock canyons in impossible colors. What had it brought him? A modest savings account, a reputation for reliable work, and the growing certainty that his efforts contributed to destruction rather than creation. If I stay, he said slowly, what would happen to my body? To my life in the outside world? Your body would rest here with honor among people who understood the value of sacrifice. Your spirit would join mine in guardianship, protecting something that matters more than individual existence. And my life outside? Marcus Blackwood would simply disappear into the desert, as many men have before. Your employers would assume you met with accident or Indian attack. Eventually, they would send another surveyor, who you would face with the same choice. Yes, until the day comes when the choice is no longer necessary. Marcus walked to the sacred spring and looked down at the carved symbols on its bottom. The artwork depicted figures engaged in various activities: hunting, farming, ceremony, storytelling. All the elements of a complete life lived in harmony with natural surroundings. Why do you believe that day will ever come? He asked. Why do you think mankind will ever stop seeking wealth and power? Ayana joined him beside the spring. Because every generation produces individuals capable of growth, people who recognize that some things transcend material value. You are proof that such individuals exist. I have spent my entire adult life serving exactly the kind of interests you oppose. And yet you climbed to this cave despite my warnings. And yet you listened to my story without running. And yet you stand here considering sacrifice for the sake of strangers you will never meet. Marcus realized she was right. Something fundamental had shifted in his worldview during their conversations. The young woman had awakened questions about purpose and meaning that his scientific training had never addressed. What would guardianship actually involve? He asked. Remaining here most of the time, learning the stories and ceremonies my people preserved, understanding the deeper connections between spirit and stone. When others come seeking mineral wealth, we would appear to them as I appeared to you, as living people who belong to this land. We would guide them away through wisdom if possible, through fear if necessary. We would lie to them. We would protect them from truths they lack the wisdom to handle responsibly. Marcus considered the distinction. Throughout his surveying career, he had encountered numerous situations where complete honesty would have caused more harm than selective truth. Telling territorial governments about every mineral deposit he discovered often led to displacement of native communities and environmental destruction that benefited only distant investors. Perhaps there was more honesty in Ayana's guardianship than in his geological reports. If I choose to leave, he said, what guarantee do I have that you will not simply kill me to protect your secrets? You have my word, the word of a ghost. The word of someone who has spent nearly a century learning that honor matters more than expedience. Marcus walked around the chamber, examining the burial arrangements more carefully. Each skeleton had been positioned with obvious care, surrounded by personal belongings that suggested lives of meaning and community connection. These people had not died as victims. They had chosen this place as their eternal home. The others who stayed, he said, did they make the same choice I am facing now? Some did. Others were men whose greed overcame wisdom, who would have returned with armies of miners regardless of what they promised. Their choice was different, but some joined you willingly. 3. Over the course of many decades. Good men who understood the value of what we protect here. Marcus thought about his life's trajectory, about the loneliness that had defined most of his adult years. He had never married, had few close friendships, spent most of his time in remote locations far from civilization. The prospect of eternal isolation in a cave should have terrified him, but somehow it felt like a natural progression rather than a dramatic change. Would I retain my memories, my sense of self? You would become more yourself than you have ever been, Ayanna replied. Death strips away the false concerns that occupy living minds, social expectations, financial worries, physical discomfort. What remains is essence, the values and connections that truly define who you are. And you? Would you remain as well? For as long as guardianship is necessary, perhaps until the day comes when humanity learns to see sacred places as more valuable than mineral deposits. Marcus realized he had reached a decision without consciously making one. The choice had been building throughout their conversation, shaped by accumulated dissatisfaction with his previous life and growing respect for Ayanna's dedication to principles, larger than personal gain. I want to stay, he said quietly. Ayanna smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, the expression held genuine joy rather than sadness. Are you certain? This choice cannot be undone. I have spent 38 years serving people who see land as commodity and progress as profit. I would like to spend whatever time remains serving something more meaningful. She took his hands in hers, and Marcus felt a warmth that seemed to flow through his entire being. Then we begin with ceremony, she said. My ancestors must formally accept you into their community. The spirits of this place must recognize you as guardian rather than intruder. Over the following hours, though time seemed to have little meaning in the cave, Ayanna taught Marcus the rituals and stories that her people had preserved for generations. She explained the significance of each carved symbol, the meaning behind the burial arrangements, and the spiritual beliefs that had sustained her community through decades of displacement and violence. Marcus learned that the cave was more than a burial ground, it was a library of cultural memory, a place where knowledge too precious to lose had been preserved in stone and ceremony. Each skeleton represented not just an individual life, but a repository of skills, stories, and wisdom that would have been lost forever without this protected space. As dawnlight began filtering down through the cave entrance far above, Marcus felt a strange peace settling over him. The physical pain from his fall had faded, replaced by a sense of completeness that he had never experienced before. Is it time? He asked. Ayanna nodded. The ceremony requires that you drink from the sacred spring while speaking your commitment to guardianship. Marcus knelt beside the clear pool and cupped water in his hands. It tasted of minerals and something else, something that might have been starlight or wind or the essence of ancient prayers. I commit myself to protecting this sacred place, he said formally. I accept responsibility for guarding the memories preserved here and for preventing the destruction that would follow their violation. As he spoke the words, Marcus felt his consciousness expanding, connecting with something vast and eternal that existed beyond individual identity. He was still himself, but he was also part of something larger, a network of guardians and ancestors that stretched back through generations of protectors. His body remained by the spring, but his spirit rose to join Ayanna in eternal vigilance. From that day forward, travelers approaching the sacred cave would encounter two figures, a young native woman and a middle-aged surveyor who spoke of the importance of respecting boundaries and protecting places too valuable to be measured in gold or silver. Most listened to their warnings and chose different paths. Some did not. But the sacred burial ground remained undisturbed. watched over by guardians who understood that true wealth could not be extracted from the earth, only preserved within it.